Okay, I need you to think about something for a second. Imagine you have a twin brother. Same face, same DNA, same everything. But at just 3 weeks old, you are separated. Different families, different cities, maybe even different countries. You grow up completely apart. No phone calls, no letters, no contact whatsoever. 39 years pass, and then one day, you finally meet. Now, here is where it gets absolutely wild. You find out that your twin also married a woman named Linda, then divorced her, then married a woman named Betty, just like you. You both worked in similar jobs. You both loved math in school and hated spelling. You both smoked the same brand of cigarettes and drank roughly the same amount. You both vacationed on the exact same beach in Florida. And you both, independently, thousands of miles apart, named your dog Toy. Now, your first reaction is probably, no way, that cannot be real. Someone made that up. But this actually happened. These were real twins, Jim Springer and Jim Lewis, reunited in 1979. And their story became part of one of the most important scientific studies ever done on human beings. Today, we are going to go deep into the science of twins. And I promise you, by the end of this video, your entire understanding of who you are, why you are the way you are, and how much of your life you actually control is going to shift. Let's go. So those twins we just talked about, they were part of a landmark research project called the Minnesota Study of Twins Reared Apart. And before we get into what it found, I want you to understand what the world believed before this study came along. Back then, the dominant idea was simple. Your environment shapes you. The family you grow up in, the school you attend, the neighborhood you live in, the people around you. Nature, meaning your genes, sure, they give you your eye color and maybe your height. But your personality, your choices, your habits, those come from how you were raised. That was the accepted view. Then this study came along and flipped everything upside down. Researchers took identical twins who had been raised completely separately, different homes, different families, different lives, and compared them. And what they found was almost hard to believe. These twins, who had never lived together, never grown up together, were remarkably similar in their personalities. Not just their looks, their actual personalities. Things like how anxious they were, how outgoing they were, how conscientious and organized they tended to be, how they handled stress. These traits were not coming from their upbringing, they were coming from their DNA. Think about that. Even twins placed in totally different family environments, one in a calm, quiet household, one in a loud, busy household, both twins tended to carry the same personality traits regardless of where they grew up. Which means your parents, as much as they love you and as hard as they tried, may have had less influence on your core personality than your genes did. And that is a big deal. But here is the part that really blew scientists' minds. The study suggested that your genes do not just determine who you are, they may actually guide you toward the life you live. Let me explain that with a simple example. Imagine a child who is genetically wired to love music. Even if that child grows up in a home with no instruments, no music lessons, no musical influence whatsoever, they are still likely to seek music out, to find it, to be drawn to it. Your DNA is not just a blueprint for your body. It may actually be a compass for your choices. Which brings us back to Jim and Jim. Two men, same DNA, completely separate lives, and yet somehow they ended up in the same places, with women of the same names, with dogs of the same names, at the same beach. Was that just wild coincidence? Or was something deeper going on? The Minnesota study leaned heavily towards something deeper. Now, since the Minnesota study, twin research has exploded around the world. Some of the biggest databases ever built are twin registries. The Swedish Twin Registry alone has nearly 200,000 twins recorded. There are also major registries in Denmark and the Netherlands. And researchers have used these databases to answer some of the biggest health questions of our time. One of the most important findings came from cancer research. Now, most of us have grown up hearing things like cancer runs in the family, and we assume that means our genes are the main thing to worry about. But when researchers looked at the twin data on cancer, they found something that surprised almost everyone. For the majority of cancers, your environment plays a bigger role than your genetics. Read that again. your lifestyle, your diet, what you eat, what you are exposed to, the choices you make day to day. Those things, for most cancers, matter more than your family history. Now, yes, we all know that smoking causes lung cancer. That one feels obvious. But it is also true for things like stomach cancer and the food choices we make regularly. The environment your body lives in matters enormously. That said, the research did find some cancers where genetics play a very significant role. Prostate cancer came in at 42% heritability, meaning nearly half of the risk comes from your genes. Colorectal cancer was around 35% heritable, and breast cancer showed about 27% heritability. So, for those specific cancers, yes, your family history is something to take seriously and monitor. But here is the empowering message underneath all of this. For most cancers, you have more control than you think. Your daily choices, what you eat, how you move, what you expose your body to, are not small things. They are the main story for most people. That is not scary. That is actually hopeful. All right, let's go somewhere even more personal. How long are you going to live? Now, before twin research came along, scientists believed that your lifespan was about 20 to 25% genetic, meaning most of how long you live comes from your lifestyle and your environment. What you eat, how much you exercise, whether you smoke, those things dominate. But after looking at the twin data, that number went up significantly. We now believe that your lifespan is closer to 50% genetic. Half of how long you live may already be written in your DNA. Now, before that makes you feel hopeless, remember the other 50%. That other half is still in your hands. Your diet, your sleep, your stress levels, your relationships, all of that still matters enormously. But it does reframe things in an honest and important way. Some people do everything right. They eat well, they exercise, they sleep 8 hours, they never smoke, and they still get sick young. And people have sometimes quietly blamed them for that, like they must have done something wrong. This research says sometimes the biology was working against them in ways they could not have controlled. And that deserves more compassion than we often give. Now, here is a fascinating detail from the dementia research in these twin databases. Scientists found that if one twin developed dementia, the other twin, even if they never showed the same cognitive symptoms, still tended to have a shortened life expectancy. Which tells us something profound. Dementia may not just be a brain disease in isolation. It may be part of a larger body-wide system that affects the whole organism, the whole person, even in twins who never develop the cognitive side of it. In other words, the biology runs deeper than the symptom we can see. Science is still unraveling exactly what that means, but it is a window into just how complex and interconnected our genetics really are. Okay, let's take a slightly lighter turn. Because the twin databases also helped answer one of the most debated questions of the last few decades. Does marijuana actually lower your IQ? For a long time, this felt settled. Studies kept finding that people who use marijuana regularly showed drops in IQ over time, and headlines ran with it. Weed makes you dumb. But then, researchers used twin data to look at this more carefully, and what they found completely changed the picture. They looked at pairs of twins where one twin used marijuana and one did not. And yes, the twin who used weed did show a drop in IQ, but so did the twin who did not use weed. Wait, what? The twin who never touched marijuana also showed a similar IQ drop? Which can only mean one thing. The drop in IQ was not caused by the marijuana. It was caused by something else, some other factor that both twins shared. Maybe a pre-existing vulnerability. Maybe some environmental factor, maybe something genetic. The marijuana just happened to be in the picture at the same time. This is the classic problem in science called correlation versus causation. Just because two things happen together does not mean one caused the other. If every time it rains you see people carrying umbrellas, the umbrellas did not cause the rain. The marijuana did not cause the IQ drop. Something else did. And marijuana just looked guilty because it showed up at the same time. Now, does this mean marijuana is completely harmless? Not necessarily. There is still research ongoing. But what it does mean is that the "weed makes you dumb" headline was not as solid as it seemed. And the twin data was the thing that showed us that. This is exactly why twin research is so powerful. It allows scientists to look past the surface and ask, But is that really the cause? Or is something deeper going on? All right, now we are getting to one of my absolute favorite studies. Because NASA, yes, the space agency, ran their own twin study, and it is one of the most fascinating things I have ever read. Here is the setup. Astronaut Scott Kelly spent 1 full year aboard the International Space Station. His twin brother, also a retired astronaut, Mark Kelly, stayed here on Earth. Same DNA, one in space, one on the ground. 10 separate research teams tracking every possible biological, psychological, and genetic change they could measure. What happened? So, first, let's talk about something called telomeres. Think of your DNA like shoelaces. At the end of every shoelace, there is a little plastic tip that stops it from fraying. Telomeres are those tips, but for your DNA. As we age, those tips get shorter, and shorter telomeres are associated with aging and disease. Stress can make them shorten faster. Poor lifestyle choices can shorten them faster. But here is what happened to Scott Kelly in space. His telomeres got longer. His cells became biologically younger while he was up there. Now, before you start booking rocket tickets, the moment he came back to Earth, they shrank back down rapidly. Scientists believe it was the body's way of adapting to the extreme stress of microgravity and radiation, a kind of survival response. But still, the fact that space travel made a human being's cells temporarily younger is extraordinary. Here is where it gets even more interesting. Scott's gene expression changed while he was in space. Now, his actual DNA did not change. The letters of the code stayed the same. But which parts of that code were switched on and which were switched off, that changed. 91% of those changes went back to normal when he returned, but roughly 9% of those genetic switches stayed changed. More than 6 months after returning, the areas that stayed changed? Things like DNA repair systems, immune function, bone formation. Space left a mark on him at the cellular level that did not fully go away. And cognitively, while Scott was in space, his brain performed normally on tests. But after returning to Earth, he experienced serious brain fog. His speed and accuracy on cognitive tests dropped significantly for about 6 months. Scientists believe his brain was struggling to readapt to Earth's gravity after a full year in a completely different physical environment. His arteries also thickened slightly. His eyes actually changed shape, which happens to many astronauts due to fluid shifts in microgravity. And his gut microbiome became much less diverse, likely due to the strict diet in space. All of this tracked against his twin brother on the ground. Same starting genetics, completely different biological outcomes. It is the most extreme version of the nature versus nurture question you could possibly imagine. And it tells us your environment, even an environment as extreme as outer space, has the power to change how your genes express themselves in real time. Now, here's a question that hits very close to home for a lot of people. Does the school you go to actually shape how smart you become? Or were you essentially born with a set intelligence level that no school can dramatically change? This is one of the most important questions in all of education, and a recent piece of research tried to answer it using twin data in a brand new way. Here's what made this study different. Most twin studies just lump all the twins together and look at average results. This study went further. They collected individualized data on each twin pair, their specific IQ scores, their specific schooling history, their upbringing details. After going through every available published study that met their criteria from the last century, they ended up with 87 twin pairs who had been raised separately and had detailed individual records. Small sample, but incredibly specific data. And what they found was remarkable. When they looked at all 87 pairs together, the average IQ difference between separated twins was about 8 points. Pretty small, suggesting genetics are dominant. But then they split the twins into groups based on how similar or different their school experiences had been. And everything changed. Twins who went to very similar schools, their IQ difference was just 5.8 points, almost as close as twins who had been raised together in the same home. Twins whose school experiences were somewhat different, their IQ gap jumped to 12 points. And twins whose educational experiences were very different from each other, their IQ difference hit 15 points. That is nearly as wide as the gap between two completely random, unrelated strangers. Let that sink in. Same DNA, same genetics, same biological starting point. But the school they attended, the quality of education, the exposure to ideas, the intellectual environment, created an IQ difference nearly as large as if they were two totally different people. This is not a small finding. It is a direct challenge to the idea that intelligence is fixed at birth. Your genes give you a starting point, but your education and your intellectual environment can move you significantly from that starting point. Now, the caveat here is the sample size. 87 pairs is not a massive number. Researchers would love to repeat this with thousands of pairs. But as the only study of its kind with this level of individualized data, it matters. A lot. And there is one more layer to add here. Other research has found that in early childhood, the environment plays a very large role in IQ variation. Young children are extremely sensitive to their surroundings. But as we get older, into adulthood, the genetic component becomes stronger. Somewhere around 70 to 80% by the time we are fully grown, which suggests that the window of childhood and education may be the most critical window we have to shape intellectual potential. Give a child a rich, stimulating, high-quality environment early, and you are giving them a genuine advantage that genes alone cannot provide. All right, we have been building toward this all video. The big question: nature versus nurture. Which one wins? Is it your genes or your environment? In 2015, researchers decided to answer this once and for all, at least as definitively as science currently can. They did a meta-analysis, which basically means they gathered every available twin study they could find, going all the way back to 1958. The result? Nearly 14.5 million twin pairs, almost 3,000 studies, close to 18,000 individual traits measured, from height and weight to personality to risk of psychiatric disorders to cognitive ability. Everything. And after analyzing all of it, the answer came out at almost exactly 50-50. Genetics accounted for an average of 49% across all traits. Environment accounted for the other 51%. Now, for any individual trait, the split varies widely. Some things are almost entirely genetic. Some things are almost entirely environmental. But when you zoom all the way out and look at the full picture of what makes a human being who they are, it is almost perfectly balanced. Half you were born with, half you built. And honestly, I find that incredibly beautiful. It means you are not just a prisoner of your DNA. Your choices, your environment, your relationships, your education, they genuinely shape you. But it also means you are not starting from zero. You came into this world with real strengths, real tendencies, real inclinations already written into your cells. The most honest answer to the nature versus nurture question is not either or. It is both. Always both. Working together, influencing each other, dancing. Your genes may push you toward certain environments, and those environments then shape how your genes express themselves. It is a loop, not a line. And understanding that loop is one of the most important things science has given us. So, were you always going to be you? Kind of. Half of you was waiting in your DNA from the very beginning. Your tendencies, your personality, your risks, your natural pull toward certain things. But the other half? That was written by your life, your experiences, the schools you attended, the people you met, the choices you made, the environments you walked into, and the ones you walked away from. Jim and Jim, those twins who ended up with dogs named Toy and wives named Linda, they shared the same genetic compass, but they still lived two different lives. And that is the miracle of being human. You are both fixed and free, both written and still being written. And the science of twins, as strange and specific as it sounds, might just be the most powerful mirror we have ever held up to the question of what it means to be alive. That is today's episode of Get Knowledged, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Did this change how you see yourself? Did anything in here surprise you, or maybe confirm something you always felt was true about who you are? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and conversations like this one are honestly some of the best ones on the internet. If this video made you think, share it. Send it to someone who would love this kind of thing. You never know who needs a little science in their day. And come back tomorrow because we drop a brand new video every single day. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next one. Stay curious, stay knowledged. Peace.